Garrett Conley wrote a memoir about his experience, and you have stayed relatively true to his story, but you've also fictionalized it. So you have to make a choice in terms of the essence of Garrett's book and what it is you want to preserve and what you want to dramatize. So when you're thinking about that and talking with Garrett about how you're going to adapt this book, what were the most important things that you wanted to preserve, even if you're preserving them thematically by adding fictional elements?
There was a few things. One was like, what do you leave out? What do you keep in? The other aspect is, what's the most important aspect of the movie? And for me, that very clearly throughout every part of the process became the family element, even though the entry point for me as a kind of a morbid curiosity coming into the book was I was fascinated by getting some understanding of conversion therapy because I'd heard a glimpse of about what it was. I was expecting more blood on the page. What I got out of it was this complicated understanding that the reason it existed and still exists, is because the motivation for sending people there, young people and influencing older people to go there, and the reason why the infrastructure exists is because it actually is born out of love and the need or interest to care for people. My feeling coming into the book was, this is a hateful group of people that have created a hateful thing to do hateful stuff. It wasn't that. It was more complicated. So I was trying to stay true to that essence. And along the way, it meant more so fictionalizing some of the conversion therapy characters, but not the practices, and choosing what to distill from that. And the biggest question is, how do you reduce a person's life, or at least a massive chapter of their life, into 2 hours without feeling like you're not doing it the proper service? How do you distill that in the best possible way? So there was a lot of decisions to make about leaving things out and what to put in.
I want to ask you about the actor next to you, Troye. When you come onto the project, Gary is a character that is rooted in the story, but is also a creation of your screenplay. What were the important conversations that you had about what this character needed to represent in terms of the audience, in terms of agency for the audience to connect to the story?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so like you said, in the sort of early drafts of the script, Gary was a very different character and a much smaller one. And I mean, I guess I'll let Joel answer. Why did you feel like we needed?
I'll start, and then I want you to continue, because
Sure.
creating a bunch of different characters within therapy was really important to me. And Gary to me was somebody who it really was an evolution and a collaboration with Troye and I. And I would like him to talk about some of those aspects, but the idea of having someone there that wasn't just a devotee, that wasn't coerced and a believer, but somebody who was like the hope for what Garrett eventually became. Right. Somebody who maybe had the agency, but not the family to support, and the feeling like once I get across that bridge, I'm making a fucking dash. But he's smarter than everybody else, and somebody that makes that turn. And what was interesting to me was allowing all of those actors in that group, Troye included, having their own narrative and being included in what that was. So I didn't just like impose my will on people, because what they could contribute themselves was going to be as valid and as important. So, we talked about that stuff a lot. Yeah.
Hey, go ahead.
I know. I saw an opportunity to, when I first read the scenes, where Jared goes to the doctor, and the doctor sort of provides this first sense of, I just remember feeling so relieved when I read the script, because I was like, finally is someone here seems to have their head screwed on.
Right.
And so then to kind of be given the opportunity to kind of further that and provide an alternative for Jared, that was a real exciting moment for me, and felt like something that I definitely wanted to be a part of.
Joel, I want to ask you about Dr. Julie in real life that Cherry Jones plays. Did you have any conversations with her, and how important was she to Garrett's own story?
I went on a fact-finding mission to Arkansas with David, my assistant, who plays Michael, my assistant in the movie, who's also a co-producer and a long-time Poor guy was it's been a long time assistant to me, and a beautiful friend. And is also part of one half of creating a podcast with Garrett, the author, called Unerased, about a broader history of conversion therapy. So he and I, Lucas Hedges, beautiful Lucas, and Garrett went to Arkansas, and we met the folks. We did as much. We looked at all the places where Love in Action had operated out of, but we sat down with Dr. Julie, and everything that in that conversation that came not only from Garrett's renting of her in the book, but what she said to me about her dilemma at the time, being a member of that church and having in her head what she knew, became the dialogue of that scene.
Danny, what it's about, like the dialogue in this film musically, because as Joel was telling his own approach to it, you can make this film any number of ways. You can make it much more dogmatic, you can make it melodramatic, you can make it much more judgmental, and all those ideas kind of lend themselves to a certain way of writing music. When you're thinking thematically about the point of view that the music is going to have, what were the conversations that you had with Joel, and what did you settle on in terms of overall themes about how the music was not going to be the movie that Joel didn't want to make in terms of being too on the nose?
Yeah, exactly. I think the most important thing you said before is not to mock LIA and everybody that works there and goes there and everything. Not to make it out to be this terrible place, because I kind of went in there thinking that same thing. Like, how could people do that? But it was really important for us. A lot of our first conversations were about how can we make a introspective, multi-layered music, intelligent and thoughtful and heartfelt, but have it not sway the audience too much into, we wanted everybody to make their own opinion about the place and what Jared was going through. And so how could we do that musically? And then the whole process of making the film, I think, what I found really interesting in the first few interviews of being asked, along with my partner Saundra, who's here, was, there are so many different emotional states and society-based things that are happening in this film. And musically, we're like, okay, so now we're at the camp, and now we're at home with them, and now he's in college and just had this ordeal happen, and now and it was all these different types of music that we needed to kind of cover, which is when we first started doing our interviews. We were like, I remember getting asked the first questions like, so what was the process like in doing the music? I was like, I can't even remember all of the music because there's so many different styles. And I was like, yeah, we start talking about one style of music, and then I was like, but then there's this other kind of music that's in there too to show this, and then that, and then this, and then that. I can't even wrap my head around all of it.
I dragged them in earlier than expected because I kind of had a feeling that there was going to be. I didn't really know. I couldn't listen. These guys know I'm totally not musical at all. So I was like, can you guys come in earlier than expected and start giving me temp music? Because the last time we'd collaborated together, I fed them temp music.
This is on The Gift?
And I was that guy who was like, hey, could you write something just like this? And they're like, So I was like, can you be involved early on? Is that okay? Rather than me just hand you a cut,
Yeah,
right?
we prefer it. We love it. It's a great way to go.
Nicole, when you read Garrett's book, the way he describes his mother is incredibly complicated, and depending on what you're bringing to the book, you're going to react different ways. I'm wondering, when you read his book, and then maybe this is not the right order, and then actually meet Martha, was that the sequence? And did the book set you up for the person that you thought you were going to meet, or did it turn out to be something very different in terms of your expectations?
A mixture. I mean, when you're creating someone that actually exists, there's a way in which you go in, and I go in through my emotional responses to the story and to really my child, because I've got to come through it as a mother and feel the things that I relate to her on, and then find the way in which I'm going to portray her. And I don't really want to, when it's a real person, I don't really want to meet them too early, because then I get into pleasing and wanting them to pat me on the back and say, well done. And that's not a good place as an actor. It's more about finding my truth so that I can come through that and then morph into her. And really find her essence. And she was, so I sort of kept her at a distance, and I tried to through the book, but also through Joel, find out what he felt, and that's how I rely heavily on the director. And then she visited the set kind of halfway through when I'd already established how I wanted to be as her, and she kind of, and I was nervous, and she and I thought, oh gosh, but she was so loving, and she brought her sister as well, and so the two of them were able to kind of, and instead then once they started encouraging me and deeply affectionate towards me, I was like, okay, now I want you here all the time. But such an actor.
I want to thank you all for skipping the Dodgers and coming to this film.